Hi, math people. I hope you're doing well. I know you guys just finished up your check for understanding, so now we're going to talk about your last kind of factoring. And it's not really introducing anything new, but it's going to be talking about factoring completely. So when we've done factoring so far, you guys did binomials, you did difference of squares, we did quadratic trinomials, and we did finding the GCF of anything, a binomial or trinomial. Now we're just going to kind of combine those different steps, and that's going to be factoring completely. So we have a flow chart right here that we really recommend you guys use. So if you are someone who's printing out the notes, this is definitely something you want to print out. If not, I would pause the video at this point and write down this flow chart because it's going to make your life a lot easier moving forward. When we're factoring polynomials, and remember, a polynomial can have any number of terms. The first thing you always want to do every single time is look for a GCF. Okay, every single time we're factoring. And then after you look for your GCF and you do what we call pull out your GCF, which we're going to show you in a second, you're either going to be left with a binomial, which is 2 terms, or a quadratic trinomial, which is 3 terms, and the first term is squared, x squared. Okay, and after we do that, we know how to factor difference of 2 squares, which is a binomial that we get, and we know how to factor something that looks like this. That's when we get 2 numbers that multiply to C and they add to B. We make our T-chart and we go from there. So let's go along the left side first. Let's say we look for a GCF and then we see it's a binomial difference 2 squares. So the first thing I'm going to do is let's look at example 1. I want to look for the GCF. What can you factor out of 2x squared and of negative 32? So I think I can factor out a 2. So if I factor out a 2, I can, let's see, if I take out a 2 from this, I'm left with an x squared. I'm going to put it in parentheses because we were factoring it out. And if I factor out 2 from 32, it's still a minus, but 32 divided by 2 is 16. And then you should notice something at that point. Yes, when we did our GCF factoring, we were done at this point. But if you look inside the parentheses, that is a difference of 2 squares. That's a squared minus b because x squared is a perfect square and 16 is a perfect square. So you want to think about, okay, let's write it out. I'm going to put my 2 out front, and then when I factor this, we know that factors to x plus 4 and x minus 4. And if we wanted to check our answer, we could FOIL, or we could multiply these 2 things and then multiply everything by 2, and it would get me back to where I started, 2x squared minus 32. So that's factoring completely because if you think about it, we did GCF factoring here, GCF, and then here we did difference of squares. So we did 2 different kinds of factoring right there in one question. Okay, for example 2, we're going to do the same thing. So I want to look at the GCF. What is the GCF of 4n squared and 36? Well, I think I could factor out a 2, but that's not the greatest common factor because there's a bigger number you could factor out. They're both divisible by 4. So I'm going to take out a 4 here, and it's going to become, let's see, when you divide the first term by 4, you get n squared. When you divide the second term by 4, you get 9. And you should notice now that you have a difference of squares. So when I write out my answer for this one, we're going to have 4 n plus 3 and n minus 3 because when we factor this difference of 2 squares, we take the square root of n squared and we take the square root of 9 and they have opposite signs. Okay, so that is factoring completely with a GCF and a difference of 2 squares. Now, if we go over to the right side, let's say we look for a GCF and then we see that we have a trinomial. This is going to be very similar, except the second stage of the factoring is going to be different because we're working with a trinomial. So for this one, I need to look at my 3 terms and say, what are all 3 of these numbers divisible by? What is the GCF for 3, 9, and 12? And my GCF is going to be 3. So when I factor that out, we're going to divide each thing by 3. And I'm going to get x squared. Negative 9 divided by 3 is negative 3x. 12 divided by 3 is negative 4. And then we might think we're done, but we need to make sure we can't factor this even more. And I think we might be able to because it's a quadratic trinomial. So I'm going to turn to a T-chart. And we know we have x's up top. And then we want to think what multiplies multiplies to -4 and adds to -3. So I might think of factors of -4, so maybe 4 and -1. 4 and -1 adds to +3. I need to add to -3. So let's try -4 and +1. We know that to be opposite signs because this is a minus. And I think -4 plus 1 is -3, which works. So when I write it out, it's going to be 3 stays out front. Make sure you keep that GCF out front. X minus 4. And then x plus 1. And that's fully factored out for us. Same thing for number 2. We are going to look for the GCF. My GCF here looks like it's a, let's see, 2, 20, and 50. I'm going to take out a 2 for this one. So I get 2 when I divide it out from each one. X squared. -20 divided by 2 is -10x. 50 divided by 2 is 25. And if I wanted to make sure I factor out the GCF right, you could really distribute it back in, and you should end up back where you started. But I'm not going to do that for this one. Now from here, we're going to have to factor it one more time. So there's another step. So I go to my T-chart. We're going to have an x and an x. We're just factoring the part in the parentheses. Two numbers that multiply to 25 and add to -10. -10. So it's not going to be 5 and 5 because that adds to +10. It's going to be -5 and -5. So when I write this out, 2x minus 5, x minus 5. But I don't want to leave my answer like that. At this point, you should be thinking we can rewrite this as 2 times the quantity x minus 5 squared. And that's how I'll write our final answer. Okay, so again, if we look at this, first we did GCF, and then we factored a quadratic trinomial. For the second one, GCF, and then quadratic trinomial. Okay, so I have 6 questions here for you to try. I'm going to go through them pretty quick. I recommend that you pause the video at this point and try out these 6 questions. Okay, if you can do these 6 questions, then you are good to go. Just make sure you check your answers with me. So pause the video and now try these out. I'm going to go ahead and explain each question. For number 1, I'm going to take out a 5 first. That's my GCF. I get x squared minus 7x plus 12 when I divide each thing by 5. After that, I'm going to factor. I know it's going to be an x and an x. If we think of my T-chart, I need to multiply to 12 and add to -7. So we're going to be x minus 4 and minus 3 because -4 and -3, they have to have the same sign to get me a positive here. So they multiply to +12 and add to -7. So I'm going to write x minus 4, x minus 3. For number 2, because it looks like it's a binomial, but we always said we have to find the GCF first. So my GCF here is 9. I'm going to divide both things by 9. I get x squared minus 9, because 81 divided by 9 is 9. Factor that out. That's a difference of squares. That's x plus 3, x minus 3. For number 3, it's a difference. You're probably going to end up with a difference of squares because it's a binomial. But when you factor out your GCF here, let's see, we have a 4 and a 16. So I could take out a 4. But you have x to the 4th and you have x squared. I can factor out an x squared from both terms. So when I do that, if you take 4x to the 4th and you divide by 4x squared, these cancel out. You're left with 2 x's in the top. So this is just going to be x squared in the first one. When you divide the second thing by 4x squared, you still have a minus. Your 16 divided by 4 is 4. But you factored out both x squareds from that. So that doesn't have any x's left. At this point, you only did your GCF factoring, which means there's another step when you're factoring completely. I can factor this thing, which is a difference of 2 squares, to be x plus 2, x minus 2. And now it's done being factored. For number 4, first step, I'm going to take out a GCF. I can take out a 3 for this one, divide everything by 3. X squared minus 6x minus 7. Let's get a T-chart for this one. I need to multiply to -7 and add to -6. So I'm going to be -7 and +1. So we'll write this as 3x minus 7, x plus 1. For number 5, when you're looking for your GCF, this is technically a 1 up front. We can't really factor out anything from a 1, but they each have at least an x. So I'm going to take out an x for this one, and it's going to make me x squared minus 4x plus 4, which is a little bit better for us because we can factor that trinomial. Because if I need two numbers that multiply to 4 and add to -4, we could try 2 and 2, but that adds to +4. So maybe -2 and -2. Now when I write that out, it's x minus 2, but we don't like leaving our answer like that, so we write it as x times x minus 2 squared. Make sure you keep your GCF that you factored out front. It has to stay out front. So that should be your final answer for number 5. Now for the last one, let's see, it's a trinomial. I take out my GCF. It looks like they're each divisible by 2, so I take out a 2x. I get x squared plus 5x minus 24. And then we need to factor that out. Let's see, factors of 24 that add to 5. They have to be opposite signs because this is a minus. 6 and 4 will not get you 5. 6 and -4, no. Let's think. How about, let's see, we said this doesn't work. No. How about 8 and 3? Let's see. 8 and 3, if we add them up, it gets me 11, but I have to have an opposite sign, so one of them has to be negative. So let's see if I make this 3 negative. That gets me 8 and -3, which is 5x, and it multiplies to -24. So this is going to be my row. So I write it out as 2x plus 8, and then x minus 3, and that should be your final answer. So remember, the only new step that we really threw in here was the first thing you need to do is look for a GCF. Once you have your GCF, we pull it out front. It comes out front, and we divide everything by it. From there, you decide, is it a binomial or a quadratic trinomial, and you factor whatever's in the parentheses, and then you write that out as your final answer. GCF out front, factor the inside, and we should be good to go. Thanks, guys.